There's another extremely troubling aspect to the president's meeting with Vladimir Putin. The White House seems to be entertaining whether to permit Russian prosecutors to question some of Vladimir Putin's biggest critics here within the United States. The proposed exchange would allow special counsel Robert Mueller to witness interviews of Russians indicted for meddling in the 2016 election, something President Trump described Monday as, quote, an incredible offer.
Russian authorities yesterday named several Americans who they want to question, who they claim were involved in Bill Browder's quote-unquote crimes in their terms, including a former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. Does President Trump support that idea? Is he open to having U.S. officials questioned by Russia?
The president's going to meet with his team, and we'll let you know when we have an announcement on that.
For a second, is that a topic that came up in their conversation? Did President Putin raise this with President Trump?
There was some conversation about it, but there wasn't a commitment made on behalf of the United States, and the president will work with his team, and we'll let you know if there's an announcement on that front.
So the Russian prosecutor general's list includes former American ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, and other U.S. officials who Putin blames for the Magnitsky Act, which leveled sanctions on the Russian president and his allies for human rights abuses, including the death of investment fund CEO Bill Browder's young lawyer in a Moscow prison, Sergei Magnitsky. In Monday's news conference, Putin accused Browder of funneling stolen money to Hillary Clinton's campaign, an allegation Browder denies and which State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert flatly rejected.
I can't answer on behalf of the White House with regard to that, but what I can tell you is that the overall assertions that have come out of the Russian government are absolutely absurd. The fact that they want to question 11 American citizens and the assertions that the Russian government is making about those American citizens, we do not stand by those assertions that the Russian government makes.
So, Elise, that's the tale of two responses to that. The State Department says it's absolutely absurd, which it is. The idea of bringing a former ambassador, Michael McFaul, sending him to Russia for some kind of a show trial or a show investigation. Bill Browder, who's been a businessman, has been a thorn in Putin's side for many years now. Putin would like nothing more than to get Bill Browder on Russian soil. And yet the White House says it's entertaining the idea.
It was the most authoritarian statement that has come out of this White House today. The preposterous idea that the President of the United States would send a former diplomat, a former public servant of the United States, Ambassador Michael McFaul, to Russia to be questioned by Vladimir Putin. And it's absolutely disgusting, and there should be bipartisan outrage over this one for sure.
And there really has been outside of the White House. I mean, we saw it publicly on Twitter. We saw some statements from various senators on both sides of that, but the White House didn't go there.
It's a real window into how Donald Trump views his power and how he views his power alongside Vladimir Putin. They're just trading their people as pawns.
But remember, he twice in the press conference with Putin, twice said this was such an interesting idea. This is such a remarkable idea.
An incredible offer.
An incredible offer.
So let's say we forgive his impulsiveness on that. They had days now to know that this question was coming. Yep. And why does the State Department have the right answer? And why does Sarah Sanders have the wrong answer? How does that? How do you think that happens, Elise?
They have different bosses.
No, but
that's why
she has to say, Mr. President, I cannot go out there and endorse this incredibly stupid idea.
She's afraid to do that. She's afraid to do that because Michael McFaul is a critic of Donald Trump, and she's afraid to go out and say anything nice about him, anything that would protect him, because the president might freak out.
And just to be clear, so that people understand, this Magnitsky Act is everything. This is Putin's #1 goal, because a lot of the money of him and his cronies is frozen overseas. This has been the beginning, from going all the way back to Trump Tower. When we talk about adoptions, we're talking about the Magnitsky Act. This is, so if Trump was acting as Putin's puppet, this would be his #1 goal.
So Putin's allegation about Bill Browder, notably similar to what was described in the talking points that Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya brought with her to Trump Tower in June 2016 in that famous meeting with the president's son and the top campaign officials on the promise of providing damaging information about Hillary Clinton. Matt Miller, Bill Browder obviously lobbied for the Magnitsky Act after his attorney was killed in a Russian prison, and President Obama signed it into law in 2012. As I say, Vladimir Putin would like nothing more than to have Bill Browder on Russian soil.
Yeah, exactly. And look, remember that this meeting on Monday was not the first time that Donald Trump had a private meeting with Vladimir Putin. He had one on the sidelines of a conference last summer. And we know, because Trump said it publicly, that one of the things that Putin raised in that meeting was the Magnitsky Act. He talked about adoptions in that meeting. So this has been a long time a desire of the Russian president, and they've now raised it with the Trump campaign first, and now with the Trump administration on repeated occasions. I go back to what happened in this meeting. We saw the president come out, as Eugene said, very intrigued by the idea and bringing it up twice. I'm curious what he said privately about that meeting, and whether, look, he knows who Michael McFaul is, and when he hears Obama administration appointee, and he watches this show, we know he does, despite the fact he says he doesn't, and he's got to know that Michael McFaul is a critic of his. And when Vladimir Putin raised this idea, he doesn't. I'm sure Trump's mind doesn't go to the legalities and what the process would be and whether it would be unprecedented to do something like this, but he thinks, I've seen this guy on TV. He criticizes me all the time. It's not such a bad idea.
By the way, we will speak live with Ambassador Michael McFaul. He'll be here with us on Morning Joe in just a little while to talk about that request by President Putin and the White House response to it. Russian interference aside, there's another big issue playing out on Capitol Hill: President Trump's pick for the U.S. Supreme Court. Democrats think they just found a big problem with the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.